Hello, my name is Lori Poland, and I am the Executive Director for the National Foundation End Child Abuse and Neglect. And I have one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world here. Her name is Alli Watt. And Alli is the Executive Director for Breaking Silence, which is a national organization that ultimately wants to break the silence about sexual assault and domestic violence. And I'm so grateful that you're here, Alli, and let's talk.
Yeah, so happy to have me.
Thanks. So tell us about what you do and who you are.
Yeah, your intro was great, but I'm Alli Watt. I started Breaking Silence about 7 years ago. I'm the founder and executive director of that nonprofit. Our mission and goal is to use a traveling interactive exhibit on college campuses to bring awareness, understanding, and prevention methods around sexual assault and domestic violence. We do this by capturing the stories of those that have been impacted by these crimes and let people walk through and hear their stories. So a little bit about what we do.
Excellent. And are you predominantly on college campuses, or do you go anywhere?
Predominantly college campuses. That's our focal point. I do presentations and, individual trainings with other organizations, but as far as like the actual exhibit and how we coordinate that, it's usually on university campuses.
Excellent. Have you guys ever done anything in high schools?
No, we've always stayed away from high school. I mean, the big thing there and the reason why we've always targeted colleges is because the vast majority of kids on the college campus are 18. And with mandatory reporting laws, it was something we talked pretty in depth about before we started the organization, but I never wanted to put a survivor in a position of having to outcry if they weren't ready. And the exhibit can bring up emotions and thoughts, which we find is a really good thing. It's super empowering as long as you have the autonomy to decide what you want to do after that moment has arisen for you. And we felt like if we're with kids that are below the age of 18, we might take away some of that power.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and really what an intentional approach. I love that.
Yeah.
So, and yet, you're still dealing with kids. I think anybody over the age of 30 recognizes that when we were 18, we were still kids. When we're 18, we certainly didn't feel like kids, but we're still dealing with a really fragile young population of people who are most of the time, freshly out on their own for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, college kids, sexual assault, domestic violence, it hits people between the ages of 19 and 24 overwhelmingly.
Wow. It's
happening 30% of the time is in this like really specific age gap. And that's college kids. And so, of course there's abuse happening to children. Of course there's abuse that's going to happen after you turn 24. But if a third of the population that's being abused is kind of consolidate into this 5-year gap, then maybe we should really focus on that gap and go into colleges. So
excellent. I love it. So tell me, what brought you to become passionate about speaking up about abuse in general?
Yeah, so I'm a survivor myself, and one thing that I really noticed when I was younger, I told my story and reported to police when I was 12 years old. But what made me really get passionate about sharing your story was that I found every time I did, people would feel at first really like caught, like, don't know what to do with it. And then I would just kind of like, it's okay. You can ask me questions. We can talk about it. It's not taboo for me. It shouldn't be taboo for you. And I just kind of learned that the more I shared, the more then people would share their story and be like, well, I also had an experience and I also went through this. And the power of I also went through became sort of my obsession and passion. And I wanted to be able to duplicate that, not just using my voice, but using the voice of others. And I went to school for history. And so I was also pretty obsessed with storytelling, and history is told through the perspective of people's experiences. And so I thought if I could combine these two things, my passion of preventing sexual assault and the historical format, which is basically taking experiences from people and telling a story about it, then I could actually prevent something and create a great amount of empathy and understanding around an issue, most people don't have a lot of that. So.
I think that's beautiful. And one of the pieces that you mentioned was that people didn't always have maybe the right quote unquote response when you would share your story. And can you speak to that? Can you speak a little bit to like what? It sounds to me like you gave them permission to not have to do anything for you.
Mm-hmm.
And simply by giving them permission to not have to do anything, but instead just to hear you, it released their discomfort and maybe even opened an opportunity for them to feel more connected and open up to you. Can you speak to that a little bit? Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely you did. I mean, I think I'll preface that with like, when I first told the people I first told, I obviously didn't really have this language at that time. They said all the right things. And the only things that they ever said to me was like, not, we can solve this, not, I promise you this is not going to be really painful. They just said, I hear you and I believe you. And the really important, the first time I told someone, that was their first response. And that kind of followed. And I was speaking to a school counselor, and then I was speaking to police and advocates. Obviously, these are trained professionals, but they didn't really say anything life altering. They just said, I believe you. And it was that simple. And that was like a game changer for me. Like, I was like, okay, like, believe me, I'm not alone. And they were honest and they were sweet and they were kind. And like, every person has the ability to use the words, I believe you, and just start there. And so I kind of just gave people permission to like, just say that. Like, just be like, we can talk about it if you want. We don't have to if you don't want to. I don't expect you to respond in a certain way. Like, I just want you to hear it. And like, that was more of a discussion instead of them having to have this perfect answer, because the perfect answer doesn't exist. And I think I just learned people's discomfort usually came from the pressure they were putting on themselves to like, I need to say something poetic right now. And we didn't, so.
Yeah. Well, and tell me, like, why do you think that people need to talk about abuse more than we already do as a culture?
I mean, I think it's more about talking about it in reality. So the media movement is amazing, and people sharing on social media is amazing, and it's super empowering. But a lot of survivors like aren't that. They're not like there yet. They're not to like the social media hashtag moment. They're still either coming to terms in themselves, or they're still not ready to quite show it publicly for whatever reason. Maybe they're still in the abuse. Maybe they're trying to work through it. And so I think that it's so important, because what Ann Can focuses on, what Breaking Silence focuses on, is like, what is like the real crux of this, and like, how do we just talk about it in normal conversation instead of having to make a statement in my social media post. I could and should live in a world where like I can go to somebody, and when they ask me my identities, I can say, female, queer, and survivor, and all of those things feel super normal and great, and that's just a part of who we are, a part of our our being. And I think that's why we got to talk about it all the time, because it only feels normal and becomes normal the more we do that.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give somebody that hasn't ever talked about it, and hasn't spoken up or shared their story, and has just kind of lived with it? Or one of the things I hear all the time is, get over it. It happened so long ago, get over it. Do you have any advice for those people that might be listening?
Yeah, I mean, I always, when I tell my story, the place where it starts is like the moment that my brain went from, oh, this is just my life, to, oh, this is abuse. And that switch in my head was probably the most significant part of my story. And because as I was trying to come to terms with the fact that this was abuse, and that was a huge deal. It went from my family member who told me that he loved me, to all of these things, to, oh my God, this is wrong. And like, that was a monumental moment. So I guess I would just invite to like, give yourself the space for yourself to say, oh, I'm a survivor, and then find someone that you love and trust and share it, or write it down, or just yell it at the top of your lungs when you go for a hike. There's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. And I think that like when we find our voice and use it, and when we put it in a story format, it just lets us change it from trauma to healing. And that's ultimately the goal. Everyone deserves to heal. Everyone deserves to share their story. Everyone deserves their story to be heard. And I would just encourage it to start at the basics of the thought and, you know, let that carry you through.
Almost like a natural progression of, you know, like once we start, so like riding a bike, right? The first time you get on, it's crazy hard and you're probably going to fall and stumble. And it might take 20, 30, 40 times of getting on that bike and pedaling forward. But eventually you kind of get into a routine, and it can almost like becomes a domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. So how does breaking silence spread the word and change the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the story, we record stories of survivors, and so we use their stories in an interactive exhibit, so people actually walk through the settings of where the abuse took place, and then here's the survivor talk through what happened in that area. So for us, we're changing the conversation because we're using real stories, real survivors' voices, and we're talking about it at its reality. We also talk to a lot of sex offenders. And the reason we do that is because we see ourselves as a prevention organization. And when you only tell one side of the story, you only get one solution. But when you open it up to both sides, you find how the worlds can come together and actually find a solve. And that's ultimately our goal, is to always solve this. And so I would say that, yeah, that's kind of how we're working to change this in this conversation, is by including everyone that's involved in it, not just survivors, not just the offenders, but everybody, because that's how we create lasting and permanent change.
Yeah. So I love how you described that there's two sides to every story. And you know, one thing that I think you and I both know is that nearly every offender was also at one point a victim. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's some value in that and beauty in the whole picture. I would love to shift gears a little bit and have you maybe share with our audience how you've united your voice with NCAN and you know, what you're doing with us.
Yeah. So I sit on the board of NCAN, and obviously, you know, Lori, you and I have worked together for a long time. I kind of focus in on like the communication, advocacy side of NCAN, and so I'm here to speak to my story. I'm here to provide expertise on what the survivor journey looks like. I'm a survivor of childhood abuse, so obviously NCAN's mission is extremely close to my heart, of that if I lived in a world where people were just talking about childhood abuse, I probably would have known what was happening to me a lot sooner. I probably would have been able to speak out about it. People probably would have checked in with me more about what was even happening in my reality. And the fact that we can create a community in a space where that is the story for kids is super powerful. And I feel very honored to be a part of that conversation and how we get there as an organization and nationally.
Well, and we are likewise extremely honored to have you with us, and love that you've taken that childhood experience and really given an opportunity and voice into that young adulthood experience, because something we also know about abuse is that it doesn't just go away. Like that story and that experience of every one of us doesn't ever just go away. It informs all of our decisions and informs the way that we operate in the world. And I think it's beautiful that Breaking Silence provides a safe environment at college campuses to work with students to empower them to have a voice, but then secondly, to know that their voice matters, right? So, and just to have a safe place to be able to talk about it. It's pretty beautiful. So nice job.
Thanks. I mean, me too. I think NCAN is really creating that too. It's about that safe space. And you know, in the past, I think it's really amazing. The focus is more positive. And, you know, there's been campaigns before around childhood abuse, but, you know, it's kind of like, don't abuse people. And I think what we're trying to say is talk about it so that people stop getting hurt. And so that's very different because that brings survivors to the table as like, oh, so my voice literally is going to create change.
Yeah.
Instead of like, just don't hurt people. And like, that's a good message too. Like, don't hurt people. That's not great.
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally, yeah, that's kind of the goal. But I think the approach at which we're taking it, which is starting with, I believe you, we acknowledge that this is a thing that exists. This is not shameful. This is not your fault. This is not something you have to carry. This is not like your cross to bear. Like, we're all in this together. And because of that, we're going to create change. That messaging and design of what NCAN's, more focused on is really amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I think together we're going to change the world, girly, and I love that you're a part of this with me, and I can't thank you enough. How can people learn more about Breaking Silence?
Yeah, we have a website that actually has some of our stories on it. So it's breakingsilenceco.org, and you can go there. We also have an Instagram that we post to. It's another great way of getting to know us. Yeah, or that, they can always reach out to me directly. All of my contact info is on the website. But I mean, we're obviously always looking for more survivor stories. The more we have in our portfolio, the more that we can talk about this holistic point of view around this issue. Obviously, we don't have every story in the book. We probably never will. But the more we have, the more I can speak to what this looks like for different populations. Or not me, but the survivor can. And yeah, I think just like, or if you're on a university campus, or if you think this program would be valuable in any way, like letting us know about those opportunities. It's always about the people and so that's kind of how they can find out more and or support the organization.
Excellent. Well, everybody thank Alli Watt for being here, and I thank you, Alli, with Breaking Silence, and an exceptional board member for NCAN. We're really grateful. So have a beautiful day.